We're back for more adventures, and recently we took what will be our second trip to the Death Valley area.
With some friends.
Yeah. So here's what we're going to end up doing. We did a few things that are nearby Death Valley, but not in Death Valley. But we had on our schedule, our first day in the area would be to explore an area called Rhyolite, which is another place I had read about after our first trip to Death Valley that we never got to. So day two, Julie, we woke up, hopped in the car, and start to make our way toward Rhyolite. And before we would get to that destination, we knew that we would be going through the town of Beatty.
Now, that was one of the original places that we kind of threw out there for staying.
Oh, we were going to stay in Beatty. Yeah. And apparently it's a good thing that we didn't choose that area.
It's a little higher up than where we were.
Because what happened that day, Julie?
It snowed. Yeah. I mean, snowed. It wasn't just little flakes that fell out of the sky and melted when it hit the ground. It was a building
proper snowstorm.
Yes, it was awesome.
It was neat to drive through. Because where we live, we don't get snow down below. We are in the town of Beatty, or Beatty, Nevada. Not sure how you say it, but surprise for us, we have found ourselves in some snow as we have approached the Beatty Museum.
So we had come up to the museum. So we were very excited. It was snowing. It was not something us Southern Californians get over here. So we had some fun with that.
And unfortunately, the museum, the website said it was open and the sign says it's open, it turns out to be closed. So no museum for us today. So off we go to the Rhyolite Ghost Town. We've made it to the Rhyolite Ghost Town on an unexpected snowy day. So quite an interesting landscape here today, and we're going to go explore some of the ruins in Rhyolite. So Rhyolite, so this is an area that's not too many miles out of Death Valley National Park, and it's on the eastern side of the park. I think it's in Nevada proper, in the state of Nevada.
We are at the old ghost town of Rhyolite, and I didn't expect this. I thought it would be more of the Western style ghost town, but it is actually stone and brick, quite large buildings. It was apparently in the gold mining times quite the town, with lots of gold miners and lots of ladies following them. But it's absolutely gorgeous, and it's snowing.
So interesting history of this place. This town basically sprung up in the year 1904, and within 12 years it would be gone. So it had a really short lifespan. It came to be because of the interest in gold and mining, and people thought that this was an area where they were going to strike it rich. And back in those early 1900s, communities where people thought that there was going to be lots of gold, people came from all over the place. So in 1904, there was just one person living in the area, and that was Old Man Beatty, whose name lives on today in the name of the town nearby. But before you knew it, there was 2,000 claims made in an area covering 30 miles. Buildings began to spring up. There was one, and I think we saw a remnant of it, 3 stories tall. It cost $90,000 to build in the early 1900s. A stock exchange was formed there.
So this is the landmark sign for this building across the way. It is the Overberry Building and Bishop Jewelry Store. And it's this building that still has looks like a structure in the middle that could have been for the jewelry, where they stored the jewelry, because it's pretty well built up. It hasn't fallen down. And then this was the Porter Building, built in 1906. So all this building says is HD and LD. They're probably brothers. Porter, 1906. So I'm not sure what this building was used for. And then there's another building this way. Don't know if it's labeled.
Yeah, we kind of have buildings just a whole lot throughout this area. So it's neat that they're not all gone and there's stuff to explore. And we don't have a lot of ruins in the United States. These are among what we have here. So we'll take it.
So we noticed that, a lot of the plastering has fallen off of these ruins. So the way that they built it up was just through stone and with some kind of mortar in between it, and that was it. And it's still standing. And it's pretty harsh out here. As opposed to the bank that has actual brick on the top. So that's a man-made product, but this is just stone.
Shortly after the town sprung up, there was a financial panic, and next thing you know, the mines started to close, the banks failed, and in 1916, the lights and the power were finally turned off in the town. Everybody left, but parts of the buildings still remain to this day.
Yeah. Good sections of walls. It's not just the foundation of buildings. It's, you've got... like that 3-story building has, the facade of it is still pretty intact. Interesting to look at the building materials of the buildings then too, because you see a mix. You see stone with mortar, and then you see on top of some of them actual man-made bricks. So it was an interesting mix of building material.
Some of them, there's signage to let you know what the building was once upon a time. And while much of the area was in ruins, just parts of buildings that used to be at the end of the main road, there was one building that was still fully intact. So this was the old train depot. But this was the one part in this area that was completely fenced off.
Right.
So the most intact, but the one thing that you couldn't walk directly up to.
Yeah, and there's probably a concern about falling building material, bricks and rocks and stuff, so they want to keep people away.
As we were kind of exploring the ruins, also dawned on us that if our schedule was a little bit different, I think you and I probably would have spent probably a few hours walking the broader area.
Yeah,
right?
even some of these little, what look like trails. I mean, you could walk off a little bit and still have sight of the town of Rhyolite, and not get lost and take a little exploration just outside of the ghost town.
Yeah, and I think there's most of the walking that you could probably do in this area would be on flat land, so not strenuous hiking, but you could make an entire day out of visiting this area. So as we were leaving the ruins of the ghost town, you drive down the road and there's several other things that you can see. So on the left side of the road was an area of bottle houses. And the one that's the most well-known here is what's called Tom Kelly's Bottle House. So Tom Kelly was one of these guys who was drawn into the area at the time of the gold rush, promise, etc. And he was a little innovative here. So as the mining town grew up, obviously you'd have saloons and places where people would be drinking. He ended up collecting 50,000 bottles in less than 6 months, and he used those to construct the house. So he, positioned the bottles, mortar in between, and next thing you know, he ended up building a 3-room house, complete with a porch, but made out of bottles. And Julie, this was not the first bottle house that we have seen in our lives, is it?
No, it is not in our little town. Just maybe 10, 15 minutes from us is Grandma Prisbrey's Bottle Village. And she did the same thing. She had collected bottles over many, many, many years. And she had not only built a bottle house, but several different bottle structures on her property.
Yeah, you and I had the opportunity to visit a few years ago. So I think at Grandma Prisbrey's Bottle Village in Simi Valley, they had, once upon a time, it was, I think, open frequently where people could go in. And then after the Northridge earthquake, it ended up where there would be like one day a year
Mm-hmm.
that the place would be open. And I think there was obviously safety concerns, et cetera. So you and I had the opportunity to go and visit, snapped a lot of photos. That's the only time that I'd ever been there. I don't know, you growing up here, if you had been there before.
Well, Grandma Prisbrey lived for quite a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So there is stories of several people, mostly on the east side of the valley, that would spend time with Grandma Prisbrey.
She was kind of like
So
a
you
local
have-
legend.
Yeah, you have a lot of stories about her from people that were a little bit older than me. I forget when she died, but
But up until we went to this place, the only bottle house I had ever heard about and seen was Grandma Prisbrey's in Simi
Yeah.
Valley. And lo and behold, there's another one in Rhyolite.
yeah.
Wonder if Grandma Prisbrey ever met Mr. Tom Kelly. Probably not, because he would have been long gone, I suppose,
Right.
by the time she was a little girl. But maybe he inspired her. Back in the car we go, probably just for 2 minutes to our
Yes.
next stop off the same road.
We had also did a little reading and we found out that there was a sculpture that was in the area. We didn't realize it was so close.
Mm-hmm.
But as you are driving into Rhyolite, there's a sculpture park, or they call it the Goldwell Open Air Museum. And there are several different types of sculptures. The one that was predominant was The Last Supper by Albert Szuklaski. This was a gentleman that created several other statues, but the most famous must have been The Last Supper. And it still stands today. We got a chance to get up close to it, and it does have a very strange kind of, shall I say, vibe to it. It's very unusual. It has a lot of creativity to it
Mm-hmm.
in his interpretation of The Last Supper, but you can kind of see where he was going with it. It had very ghostly-like figures, and those figures actually, I think, were meant for human beings to get up and actually nestle yourself into them. So it was very interesting.
Well, he created it with, initially there were human beings that were draped with something or other, and so he poured plaster over them until the plaster dried, and then the people vacated these molds.
Yeah, and he kind of created like the ones that were sitting. There's
Mhm.
little benches for them. He was inspired to make this sculpture by finding a resemblance between the Mojave Desert and the Holy Land scenic vistas. Each figure is just a stark white cloak that you were talking about, when you
Yeah.
have that draped over effect that seems to drape over nothing
Yeah.
because
Almost like they're like
Yeah.
over invisible
yeah.
figures.
He had a
Yeah.
few more. He had one that he also created that was called the Ghost Rider, and it was one of the figures that was preparing to mount onto a bicycle.
It was also interesting. I was reading the other night. So when he created the Last Supper sculpture, he initially thought that the sculpture itself would only last for a few years because the climate in the area is so harsh, between
Mhm.
this beating sun that's the most extreme, almost, compared to anywhere in the world, winds that can get very strong.
Mhm.
He thought within a couple of years his sculpture would be disintegrated or blown to bits, and it still stands there
No,
today,
yeah,
and
they're
looks
all still
beautiful.
standing.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're fascinating.
yeah.
You just kind of look at them. It's not one of those things that I walked away just with a glance, said, "Oh, nice," walked away. It kind of drew you into it.
Yeah, we spent a bit of time, and we got very up close.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Then
Yeah.
I walked across, there's this little gully type thing, and across the way was another sculpture because other artists came in, and there are other sculptures and pieces of artwork there. And one of them was a 25-foot pink woman constructed solely from cinder block. And it was very fascinating. At first, I wasn't sure what it was supposed to depict, but it didn't take long to look at it and said, oh, that's a woman in the nude, is
Mhm.
what it was, made from cinder block, which was really fascinating.
We've got this deck area with a whole bunch of these things people do with the rocks on top of the rocks. Coming up to this artwork seating area. And it says, fragile, sit gently, no groups. So apparently sitting is allowed. Would you like to sit?
That's what I'm doing.
And we have a guest sitter
My butt's gonna get all wet.
who's going to...
Oh, this might be. I'm gonna try to sit. My legs are all wet.
There you go. So, if you like art, probably like more modern type of art and quirky Americana art, here's this place in the middle of nowhere, free to drive up to, and you can spend some time looking at these sculptures that are just left for us to admire and appreciate. I didn't expect to see all of this in this one location. We got the ghost town, we got the open air museum, we got the bottle house. There was even a cemetery there that if our schedule was a little bit different, you and I probably would have spent some more time, checking that out. But we didn't get to that, but that's also in the area. So just a few miles from Death Valley is this neat additional experience that if you've got an extra day to bolt onto a Death Valley trip, I'd recommend driving out to Rhyolite and checking it out.